Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Emma Goodman with Becker's ASC Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are pleased to have Scott Becker, publisher of Becker's Healthcare, here to moderate the Q&A, and we are looking forward to your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it's my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenters. We're pleased to have Nader Sami. He is the chairman and CEO of National Medical. National Medical is the ASC revenue cycle company in the U.S. with over 200 surgery center clients located across 40 states. Prior to National Medical, Nader was the founder and president of one of the largest healthcare revenue cycle companies in the U.S. before selling the company. And previously, he was an investment banker at Merrill Lynch in New York and San Francisco, as well as a corporate finance attorney. We're also pleased to have TJ Rock joining us today. He currently serves as the VP of Technology at National Medical. Prior to joining the company, TJ spent 15 years in Washington, D.C., working as a systems and security engineer for the Defense Information Systems Agency, the U.S. Department of Justice, and SAIC. In those years, TJ designed and implemented several enterprise solutions, including virtual desktop infrastructure, mobile device management, MS Exchange, MS System Center, backup and recovery, disaster recovery, and data loss prevention. Nader, I'll now turn the floor over to you to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, Emma. So from our perspective, running a surgery center today is more complex than it's ever been. There's significant reimbursement challenges. There's been a significant growth in patient financial responsibility, which is putting even more and more pressure on the revenue for surgery centers. On top of that, there's increased regulatory requirements such as ICD-10, healthcare reform, quality reporting, et cetera, which is doing nothing but adding additional costs to the operations for all these centers. In addition to that, the technology landscape is rapidly changing, continuing to put pressure all the way around on centers. So given these challenges, what we see is most owners of and administrators of surgery centers constantly working to increase their revenue while managing their expenses, trying to cut them or at least maintaining them. So the areas where we see expenditures made are areas that lead to revenue growth, direct revenue growth, or a direct improvement in the patient experience. The areas where we see typically cut the soonest are in the areas that are perceived, and I emphasize perceived, to not have an impact on revenue growth or that patient experience. Areas such as security, IT infrastructure, back office administrative functions, etc. So today we want to discuss how critical it is for you to understand the significance of evaluating these technology investments and the incredible financial and reputational impact it can have on your business. Specifically, we're going to get into details on cybersecurity, as healthcare has gone from really the overlooked industry by hackers in the past to the #1 most attacked industry today. In addition, we're going to discuss IT infrastructure and considerations on how to focus and maximize your investment in your IT infrastructure to help your business really operate in the most efficient way on a go-forward basis. And finally, we're going to touch on the importance of business intelligence and analytics. With that, I'm going to turn it over to TJ to jump into cybersecurity.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about that. We've seen these headlines. We see them every day. Since 2003, there has been $40 million in HIPAA fines. Before 2009, each fine was $100 per day with an annual cap of $25,000. In 2009, that changed from $100 to $50,000 a day with an annual cap of $1.5 million. In 2014, the improper deactivation of a server resulted in the PHI of over 6,800 individuals being online, and they were fined $4.8 million. In 2015, there were 253 healthcare attacks. So HIPAA is serious, the fines are serious. So we pulled some statistics. In 2015, healthcare was ranked the most attacked industry, replacing finance. Healthcare moved from number 5 on the list to number 1. In 2015, over 100 million healthcare records were reportedly compromised. We have some examples. In 2016, June 26, 2016, roughly 700,000 patient records went for sale on the darknet from one health organization. Now, for those that don't know, the darknet is like the internet, but for criminals. You can't access it unless you really go out of your way. And every single day, people are trying to auction off healthcare information. So this isn't something that you can just Google and make sure you're safe. Fortunately, there are websites like databreaches.net that do their best to report it to you. But it's a scary thing to have that information being sold, perhaps without your knowledge. 60% of attackers are from the inside, and half of those are intentional. When I say the inside, I'm talking about your employees, contractors, clients. Half of them are intentional. As reported by Beckers in July of 2016, Elena Wells pled guilty to stealing patient information to file tax returns, requesting refunds be sent back to her. In June of 2015, Monique Walker sold the personal information of 12,000 patients while working for a medical center and sold them to an identity theft ring. The average organization experiences 53 million security events annually. Now, a security event is not necessarily a bad thing. Anytime you are using privileged access or you're authenticating to something, you are generating a security event. And we're going to come back to why that number, 53 million, is important a little later in the presentation. According to a 2015 report, the average attacker isn't even discovered for 146 days. That's 6 months. I'm sure everyone on the phone is familiar with the Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield compromise. The hacker was on their system for 20 months before being caught. 20 months, and no one knew.
And TJ, just jumping in for a second, one of the interesting points to me on this was that healthcare was 5th last year and moved up to 1st. Industries such as financial services that were 1st have invested so heavily in security and cybersecurity that they have protected themselves and made themselves a much more difficult target. Healthcare is today probably the easiest target, and with incredibly valuable information, from credit card information to social security numbers, etc.
So according to a PricewaterhouseCoopers report done for 2016, the average breach costs $200 per patient record. The prevention is $8 per patient record. So if we look at last year's statistics of 100 million patient records compromised, we're looking at $20 billion in damages versus $800 million in prevention. It's a significant cost saving if you factor in the fact that if you are compromised, you are going to pay a lot more money, and your chances of being compromised are very high. So we're going to talk about some of the things you can do. Now, there's a lot of information out there about how to secure your environment. There's firewalls and data encryption. Obviously, there's the HIPAA compliancy. We're going to talk about other things that I don't see being mentioned as frequently. Some of this is going to be a little more technical. Some of this is general. So I'm going to do my best to kind of walk the line for everybody in the audience. So OS hardening. If you have a Windows environment, you don't have to pay anything. You can harden your operating system by following a set of guidelines available online for free from the Defense Information Systems Agency, or NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. These controls, and that's what they're called, security controls, for those who don't know, these controls are extremely granular. So I'm talking beyond setting group policy or a default domain policy and password expirations. I'm talking about getting into the nitty-gritty of your registry and making changes so that the only things that are happening on your computers are the things you are authorizing to happen on your computers. One quick point, actually, if we could go back, because I wanted to add this. If anyone out there Googles Distict and you find all these controls, I would just make a recommendation to go very slowly and methodically in implementing them, because you can brick your entire environment if you decide to use every STIG available to you. The entire point is to prevent action on the computer. So obviously there will be some actions by nature that you have to allow. Okay, MDM, mobile device management. Now this one has increased in its reputation and being mentioned. I designed the mobile device management solution at the Department of Justice back when the DOJ was considering a BYOD policy. BYOD, for those that don't know, is bring your own device. If you have a personal phone and you get corporate email on it, that's BYOD. So what are the benefits of BYOD technology? Or I'm sorry, MDM technology? Well, the benefits are that you can make sure that no matter what, people accessing your data are doing it from an encrypted device. So if it's ever lost or stolen, the bad guys can't get in and just start stealing patient information. If you opt to buy a slightly more advanced MDM technology, you start getting into some serious capabilities. The ability to wrap iOS, Android, and Windows apps in 256-bit AES encryption. When you wrap these apps, you prevent the operating system from communicating directly with the apps. And all of those apps communicate with your organization's network through micro VPN tunnels. The difference here is that your users can access corporate data without having to go through the motions of setting up a VPN on their phone and connecting to your network. And so for the non-technical folks on the phone, that means that you can access corporate data without jumping through hoops, and you're doing it in a very secure way. Data loss prevention. So data loss prevention is a huge term, actually. It is a huge term. It's policy, it's technology. The technologies are extremely wide-ranging. You can have technologies that scan your email messages for specific sensitive data and prevent that message from being sent. You have technologies where you can lock down the access to a document so that someone has to authenticate to a cloud-hosted server maybe in order to even decrypt and access that document. The really important part to remember is, as we mentioned before, 60% of attacks are internal. And if half of those are intentional, DLP is a necessity. So it can get expensive, but it's the only way to ensure that any malicious intent from insiders in your organization cannot take information without you knowing it or you allowing it. Okay, so SIEM is pretty new. Earlier we talked about the 43 million security events that are generated annually. Now, it's generally a security policy everywhere that you review your security audit logs. I'm willing to bet almost no one does. It's too much. It's too much if you have a team reading through it every single day. Those logs get generated every second and more often, as any of the systems administrators or technical folks on the phone are completely aware of. SIEM is a way to leverage modern technology in a way that you can actually audit those security events. And so what happens, kind of talking big picture, what happens is those events get generated, they get sent up to maybe a cloud-based server. The server then runs it through a machine learning and artificial intelligence, trying to match it against a huge database of known attacks. Now, they're not just looking at one Windows server. They're actually looking at your entire infrastructure. So they're looking at the logs generated by your Cisco devices. They're looking at the logs generated by your firewalls. They're looking at the logs generated by your servers. And they are looking for signatures that match known attacks. If the artificial intelligence recognizes a signature and thinks it's an attack, it'll then get analyzed by a professional team of security experts. Then they'll call you. It could be 2 a.m. It's usually 24-hour monitoring depending on what service you go with. They will call your cell phone, and they will tell you, we think you're under attack right now. That's how you solve the 6-month problem. At least that's part of the solution. So we have some general recommendations for security. This is not comprehensive by any means. It's a good starting point. So the first thing I would recommend is make sure that you appoint someone to become your security officer. It could be a contractor, it could be someone internal. It doesn't matter, but somebody has to be paying attention to this all the time. It's an incredibly complex field, and it changes every day. The attacks are happening every day. The threats are different every day. Sometimes the threats are 20 years old and no one knew about it. That just happened recently. Someone needs to be plugged into this world and completely aware of what the known threats are and what they should be doing to prevent them. Your security posture should exceed HIPAA requirements. Being compliant with HIPAA is an absolute necessity. We all know that. However, being compliant with HIPAA does not prevent you from being fined by HIPAA if your data is breached. You have to go above and beyond the bare minimum requirements that HIPAA sets forward. So I think one of the best starting places, as I mentioned earlier, are looking at the comprehensive security standards set forth by NIST and DISA. And there are a number of other sources. Once you start getting into this and really digging, you will see those. Research new tech, trends to improve your posture. Obviously, I mentioned SIEM earlier. There's a lot of new technology out there that are going to make solving certain issues a lot easier. It's worth paying attention, listening to the security vendors that are out there, seeing what products they have to offer you, because even though they might sound a little expensive up front, they'll probably end up being significantly cheaper than you think by saving you in manpower, by saving you in possible fines or lawsuits. Training and education. Since the majority of the threats are internal and half of those are unintentional, then we can assume that that's because the users haven't been properly trained on how to identify phishing messages in email, or not to open up questionable links in their email, or not to download things and execute the code without understanding that they were sent to a fake bank website or something along those lines. So educating your users, maybe beyond annual training, depending on how often your staff changes. It's incredibly necessary for the people working for you to understand that everything could be a potential threat or an attempt to steal data from your organization. So here's another statistic that I think is really helpful. This is something else that isn't going to cost you a penny. According to US CERT, and US CERT basically identifies all the software vulnerabilities and their corresponding software patches. According to US CERT, 85% of known attacks that have been reported can be thwarted by just patching your systems with the latest security updates. It's very simple, and it gets you 85% of the way there, and it won't cost you anything extra. How many folks click dismiss when they get a prompt from their computer saying, please install these updates? It's something to consider. Those updates are incredibly necessary. Inconvenient, yes, it takes 5 minutes to reboot the computer, but necessary.
And TJ, this is Nader, just before you jump to the next section, I think it's important to note that our company is actually not an IT services company that provides these services per se, but rather we're looking at these issues in exactly the same way that the surgery centers and the hospitals would from our own perspective, because we also house, maintain, and touch and manage all of this information and data. So we are looking at this genuinely in exactly the same way with the same mindset. And TJ will be the first to tell you. I told him when he got here, I have a 10 and 10 rule. All IT meetings should be 10 minutes and under $10,000. And so this isn't an area where we enjoy spending necessarily more. I think it's just such an important area to be thinking about.
Thank you, Nader. Okay, so IT infrastructure. So we kind of covered how scary the world is, and we talked about some of the solutions that are out there. This is going to get a little more boring, I think, for the non-technical folks, but it's actually more necessary for the non-technical folks. So when we talk about risks of under-investing in IT, we're talking to people who don't necessarily spend the money for the right types of employees or consultants, that aren't investing in that additional infrastructure, that aren't investing in those security technologies. There's more than just being HIPAA compliant or being safe from threats or just having fast computers. So one of the things that we've identified is a decrease in efficiency, which we've seen a lot. Systems get slow, they start bogging down, and it takes a very long time to execute simple tasks. So it's important to consider that every extra second that it takes for your folks to accomplish something is a second longer in their day of not accomplishing another task, and it adds up very, very quickly. Non-compliance with industry regulations. Here's another one we've seen a lot. If you have an outdated operating system or software that is no longer supported by the vendor, you are already in violation of HIPAA high-tech. So even beyond having a faster system or modern technology, you could be in violation just because you haven't upgraded. You could lose patients, clients, customers, and even physicians. So according to a Microsoft study from 2013, more than 90% of consumers would consider taking their business elsewhere rather than work with a company that uses outdated technology. Now you might be wondering, how would a patient know that we have slow computers? Well, outdated technology is more than just slow computers. I would ask you, how are your patients registering? Are they doing it by paper? Are they having a long, painful conversation over the phone? So those would be tells, I think, that your patients might be working with outdated technology. Inexperienced IT staff. So one of the other things that I think can get in some folks' way is, because the significance of IT is minimized, the IT staff that are responsible for the infrastructure might not necessarily be able to handle all of the requirements that are necessary to do their job. So IT is an incredibly complex field. There's a lot of specialization, and it's important to keep that in mind if you want to stay compliant with HIPAA regulations, if you want to have modern technology, and if you want somebody who's going to try to plan for your organization's growth. This all requires a lot of experience and knowledge, and sometimes you might have to get some help from the outside world if you don't have a true internal IT department and you are growing significantly. So now we'll talk about the plus sides. So beyond having a fast computer, right? We said it's inefficient to have a slow computer, but having a fast computer, having increased efficiency means more than just having a fast computer. So we're talking about automation. Certain tasks can now be automated. So now your employees don't actually have to spend 35 minutes typing something in, because this new program will automatically convert data from one field to another, depending on whatever your processes and workflows are. It's amazing when you look into it how much can actually be taken off of your users' hands, which, by the way, will also increase the accuracy. So the acceptable data entry error rate is about 5%. Well, if it's automated, it'll be 0. Real-time management dashboards. Now, this is going to touch a little bit on the BI, the business intelligence, and auditing, or reporting. But having real-time dashboards, seeing what your data is in real time, the numbers you care about, needs modern technology. Flexibility to adapt to rapidly changing needs. This is your ability to either grow or maybe reduce size. Sometimes that's necessary too. But if you have the wrong technology, you are not going to be nearly as flexible or adaptable to handle changes in your organization, whether it's exponential growth or the opposite. That same Microsoft study that I referenced earlier also stated that 62% of consumers say they're likely to become a repeat customer of a business that uses modern tech. Now, I guess I understand that repeat customers in the healthcare industry, when you're a provider, is maybe not something that you want to count on, but if a patient does require follow-ups, and if you're a primary care or something along those lines where you're going to be seeing the same person over and over again, then it's important to have modern technology, especially for the younger generation, if you want them to come back to you. So we can move on. So you can't just throw money at the problem. It's more complicated than that. So you can't just give your current IT guy a huge budget and tell him, okay, so here's all the threats. We want a faster system. Spend whatever it takes. Technology costs add up very, very quickly. So you have to have the right people in place to handle that budget. And they have to prioritize your needs. So maybe you can't get everything done this year. And maybe it takes a couple of years to get everything done that you need done. But you can't just dump money into it and expect the problems to go away. It requires the expertise on that end to handle the budget itself. Now, identifying the budget is very difficult. That depends on the needs of your organization. I would say that in general, IT budgets range from 2.5 to 5% of the revenue of the company. There's another metric that you can use that comes up to around $8,500 per user. There's a lot of different ways to try to arrive at a budget. I would say what's more important than either of those two numbers is making sure that your organization is compliant, secure, and efficient. So however much money it costs to get to that point, I would say that's your budget. So here's what I think is important if you're looking at technology. These are the questions you should ask yourself. Do your users have access when they need it? Do your users trust the data they interact with? Do you have bad data? If they run a report, are they going to get the right information, or are there a bunch of problems and glitches and data entry errors that make the data useless? In the event of a disaster, how long would it take to become fully operational again? How easily can you scale, either from growth or loss? Is your environment unified? Is there single sign-on? Do your users have to go to 25 different places with 25 different logins to accomplish their job? Or can they use one to do everything? And capability. And this is where we talk about the reporting and analytics, interpretation, comprehension of data, automation, things of that nature. Okay, so again, for the non-technical people, you might be asking, what are the available solutions? Where do you put this infrastructure? Who manages it? I've broken it down into 4 basic options. You can do on-premise. The pro of on-premise is it is 100% under your control. It's easy to access. It's easy to replace hardware, do upgrades, the whole 9. Now, I just want to point out that when I say on-premise, I am talking about it's still ensuring that you have dedicated power, proper temperature control, having a couple servers placed under your desk on-premise. The cons of having systems on-premise, of having your infrastructure on-premise, is that it is also 100% your responsibility. So sometimes, especially if you have some slightly more advanced technology, there are problems that arise that take a long time to solve. Whether it's a SAN, whether it's your firewalls, or if you have NIDs, I mean, it gets really complicated, and you could shut down your entire organization's operations trying to manage all of this complicated technology yourself when it could be handled by someone else that has the time and expertise in those specific IT fields. It also makes you dependent on your building's power, your city's weather, your ISP. I mean, we're in Missouri. If our data center if our infrastructure was placed on site, a tornado is out. So it's important for us to have our data globally distributed, which I'll get to shortly. You could also have a private data center. If I'm telling you about private data center, or if you already have a private data center, then you probably have a fully funded IT department with a huge staff. Private data centers are incredibly expensive. It requires a lot of people, a lot of experienced people to run and manage it. And so if that is your solution, then you probably don't need to even listen to this. Hosted data center. So this is for smaller organizations that want the same advantages as large organizations when it comes to data centers, having the proper temperature controls, having the proper backup power, having the proper dedicated power, and all the other facility management requirements, cameras, things like that, to make sure people aren't just sneaking onto your data site. Hosted data centers allow you to take advantage of those same capabilities as a private data center, but you're co-located with plenty of other organizations that are small, medium-sized, and you're all in the same facility. You might have a dedicated rack, you might have a dedicated virtual server, but you're all in the same facility. Those facilities generally have very good disaster recovery plans that are redundant, at least regionally redundant. Sometimes they're nationally. Rarely I've seen them nationally or internationally redundant, because at that point you are talking about truly cloud-based. Some of the cons can be that it can be difficult to perform upgrades and fixes. You have another party that you have to coordinate with. So if you have internal IT, you have a hosted data center, and then you have your software vendor, you'll have to coordinate with all of those parties to make something happen. And so it can be problematic sometimes. Okay, and then cloud hosting. So what's the cloud? I'm going to get into that in the next slide. It's definitely a buzzword, but it has a meaning as well. So I'd like to kind of get into how I distinguish the cloud from traditional data hosting. The pros is cutting-edge hardware, managed by industry experts. So I'm talking about Microsoft and Amazon. I don't know if anyone out there has ever taken the time to look at the data centers that Azure and Amazon, AWS have, but they're absolutely incredible. I come from the federal government, and the data centers I see at Azure and Amazon are on par, if not exceeding in some cases. So they're incredibly impressive. The cons are, obviously, you have zero control over underlying hardware. They perform upgrades, they're changing things out. You can't tell them no, and you don't even know that they're doing it. Now, I haven't, in personal experience, seen that have a drastic effect on anything, but anything's possible. You're also subject to changes in service, available technology, and support. So, if you have a subscription-based, infrastructure, and Microsoft or Amazon decide they're going to charge more, then you're getting charged more. So that would be a con. Okay, so revisiting the on-premise solution for the non-technical audience. I just wanted to kind of list out very quickly the things that you are actually responsible for if you have an on-premise solution. I won't read off every one of them, but I think it's important to note that in large organizations, enterprise organizations, each one of these bullet points and more is a dedicated profession all by itself. That's how complex each of these get. So I just wanted to make sure everyone that isn't in the information technology field understands that. And at the bottom, we're pointing out that hardware generally has a 3 to 5 year life cycle. And so if you are growing very quickly, then, or if your plan is to grow very quickly, then you're looking at buying a lot of hardware on a frequent basis. Okay, so I said I would kind of go into the details of how I define cloud computing a little bit more. I'm talking specifically, there's obviously various cloud solutions. I'm talking specifically about infrastructure as a service, so instead of a data center or an on-premise solution. According to Gartner, the usage has increased 38% from 2014 to 2015. This has been a very fast adoption rate. A benefit is obviously it eliminates the need to purchase and deploy and maintain IT assets. I mean, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about high SCSI connections. You don't have to think about setting or configuring virtual VLANs correctly or virtual routers. It's all done pretty simply for you. And I would say that if you don't have the manpower for a traditional data center, it's definitely it's a huge added bonus to using the cloud. So there's the TCO, the total cost of ownership, and that's talking about how managing software applications can be 4 times the cost of initial purchase. We're not going to get into the specifics of calculating your TCO. Everybody's is different. At the very end, I think we have a quick snapshot of what a TCO calculator from AWS looks like. It's just something that I think if you're looking to make a change in your infrastructure, they're useful tools to understand the full costs of ownership of IT. Enhanced security, so you'll still be responsible for your own security, but the data center itself you don't have to worry about at all. So I've got 2 screenshots here. This is Azure. The next one's going to be Amazon Web Services. This is what I mean by globally distributed. It's geo-redundant. Your data is backed up all over the world. So a natural disaster, a significant natural disaster, could happen in the United States, and maybe the building's gone, but at least you know your data's still there. Okay, and then this is the TCO calculator. I think there's a lot out there. I just recommend it for anybody looking to make significant infrastructure changes. I think it helps kind of spell out how expensive some of these things can get. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, TJ. So I am going to jump now into, so I categorize TJ's security and IT infrastructure as the boring technology, and I think of business intelligence and analytics as the very fun and interesting technology. So I get to talk about that. To me, business intelligence, it's just so critical. We talk around here that data has become king. It's a moving landscape, and to not be able to track really every bit of information throughout your operation puts you in a very limited situation. So, as we talk, we can't manage what you don't measure, and we firmly believe that and think it's just so important for all healthcare providers and surgery centers, in particular. And in terms of the thought process here, there's daily information that we should be tracking, there's weekly information we should be tracking, and there's monthly information, and we'll get a little bit into different ways to be able to obtain that data and thinking about how to analyze that information correctly and then take action on it to make sure that your operation is improving every single day. So this next slide, to me, is so important. It really it covers the different areas, and depending on what your role is in the operation, whether you're the owner, you're the administrator, you're on the board, you're on the operations team somewhere, some of these key performance indicators will apply more or less to you. At a big picture, it's good to look at all of them, and then as I would think of it, as you break it down kind of by function, by department, you're going to have 2 to 4 key performance indicators by department that really are going to drive the activity and what you really want to track to make sure that you are doing everything and flagging any issues that aren't happening. So if you look at these first 4 on here, clinical hours per case, medical supply costs per case, inventory turnover, and cases per number of operating rooms, this gets into really the management, in a sense, of your surgery center. And to be able to really understand those numbers, a lot of times people focus on the revenue side of things, which is of course very important, but you need to have a complete picture of your costs all the way around on a big picture basis, and then down to it broken down by specific types of procedures, by different payers, by specialties, so that when you're taking on the cases that you're really properly allocating and making sure that you're not, of course you're factoring in the revenue that you're going to generate for that, but what are you spending all the way around, again, in your clinical hours, supply costs, your inventory, your implants, et cetera, and how much of your overhead is being utilized for that time frame. So those areas really get to the management side of things. And we've also broken this down, if you see operational KPIs and financial KPIs. So you're getting into the operations and how you're running your operation, and then your financial KPIs are kind of the results, or another way of talking about it is leading indicators on the operational side and lagging indicators on the financial side. So really important is to track your days to bill, because that really is telling you how efficient your billing operation is from that perspective. From the time the doctor sees the patient, how quick, is his information in the EMR or the transcription service? Is it getting over to your coding team? Does your coding team have what they need? Or how quickly are they turning it around and getting it entered into the system? How quickly is that getting submitted electronically to the payer? So that is from the time doc sees patient till that claim is submitted to the payer and received by the payer. And ideally, you can break it out. If you've set your BI tool correctly, you can break it up to look at each of those pieces. So maybe your days to bill are 4 on average in that scenario. How much of that is coming from different areas? So it really gives you that insight as to where you want to go to find your efficiency. Sometimes you might have a month where that 4 goes to 8. What happened? If you're tracking that every single, I would say this is a weekly type of a tracking mechanism. If you're tracking that weekly, nothing will ever get out of whack. You will catch it before you find out somebody didn't do something for 2 weeks, or a process fell down, or you haven't gotten all the operative notes from a particular surgeon. So it allows you to attack those problems. It's so important. Kind of jumping down a couple to the coding accuracy and turnaround time, AR productivity and resolution rate. Again, if you build your tools correctly, what you will want to do and what you'll be able to have is production down to the individual person. And it's really important to understand the production down to what each person did that day, that week, that month, setting goals, having targets for them, and making sure that you're managing that, so that you're managing, again, the efficiency of your operation, the costs of your operation, not overstaffing, not understaffing. And it takes a lot of time, effort, not just to track that, but to know what those numbers should be, and to have enough experience and enough data to be able to do that. It's very, very important. Jumping down a couple more, days to pay, overall and by payer. Again, this is one that's so critical. That's telling you, if you're looking at each single payer and you know how long, it does 2 things. One, it gives you ability to have really predictive modeling from the standpoint of your revenue. You know what type of payers, what cases, the specialty mix and the payer mix, and you can understand that this particular, Medicare here is going to pay within 15 days. The Blues are going to pay 30 on this particular case. You're out of network here. This one's going to take longer. And being able to model that out so you can really manage your cash flow and understand where your numbers are coming, and not be surprised on any given month. And if you see fluctuations in that, it allows you to immediately identify that you've got a problem somewhere with a payer. So looking at it in a big picture way, it can get muddied a little bit. It's still good to look at, but really being able to look at it individually by payer in that scenario is extremely helpful. Clean claim percentage, that again goes back to the efficiency of your operation. You want to get your claims out the door clean without denials as much as possible. That's everyone's number one goal. And to be able to track that, and then having on the back end, when you're finding errors and finding issues in your AR department, having a good feedback loop to whether it's a front desk issue, a coding issue, whatever the issue is, to be able to shrink that down and increase that clean claim percentage. And again, when you're tracking denials, breaking it down into the categories. What's your denial percentage and where are they coming from? Are the demographic errors, no auth, coding issues, didn't pay per contract, etc. What are the issues going on? We mentioned earlier the cash collections from a patient perspective growing. So being able to track your point of service cash collections, it's not an area that a lot of surgery centers really emphasized or focused on in the past, but it has really grown in importance today, and I think is a critical metric. And of course, that mix, again, we've talked about the specialty mix, case mix, et cetera. Going to the financial KPIs, so this is telling you, to me, again, these are lagging indicators. This is the end report card. How are we doing on a cash per case basis? And again, looking at it on a per provider basis, on a per payer basis, understanding what's paying where. If there's a shift in the specialties month to month, being able to know that I was doing X amount of orthopedic cases last month, that dropped by 15% and was replaced by plastics or by eyes, which is reimbursing in this scenario maybe at 50% of what the ortho was, and being able to factor that into your numbers and understand what that is going to do, from your overall results perspective. Net collection percentage, that matters to some, matters less to others, depends on what you're doing with your charge master, but also just another good metric to kind of keep you in line. And of course, your basic AR days and days over 90 are super important. So those are, I wanted to run through the sorts of KPIs that we think are critical to surgery centers. And with respect to that, there's so many different ways to be able to track this. So for example, there are certain reports that will give you some of this information within your practice management system. There are, and there may be limitations there. There are other reports that you can get out of your clearinghouse, and they may have some dashboards that will really help you look at your claims data. Then there are other third-party business intelligence software tools that can be bolted onto your system, where you can, you can take that, utilize the benefit of their years of experience of building business intelligence software for you to be able to extract that data and create dashboards for you and make that easier. Some of those tools are more customizable. Some of them are more off the shelf and sort of can to address probably 90% of your needs, et cetera. So understanding what is most valuable from your perspective. And then there's another option. It sort of aligns with the way TJ kind of laid out the scenario of doing things yourself versus not. You can build your own data warehouse. You can build your own BI tools. You can build a data warehouse and utilize a third-party business intelligence tool, again, depending on what your needs and your objectives are, what you're trying to accomplish, and factoring in the cost. There's, of course, varying costs for those different options as well. And just flipping to the next slide here, this is just an example of a report that comes out of one of the major clearinghouses in the space. And it shows you, again, it's nice, it's easy to read, it's got good dashboard information. There's multiple other kind of metrics here, but this, just in one page, you get to see what's going on with your AR days, your patient responsibility, your claim volume, what's going on with denial. So again, and there's multiple of these other areas. So again, you've got the data, it's there, you're already paying for your clearinghouse. So that is one way and one place to do it. If we go to the next slide, this is an example of one of the third-party business intelligence tools that services. Probably a lot of you guys know this is actually a Metabest report here, and this shows also in a very nice way. And again, you can set up your KPIs and adjust them to what matters to you. But this is looking at where you are on your case count for the month, what you're trending to, your charges, your payments, your write-offs, supply costs, implant costs, staff costs, equipment costs, fixed costs, total costs, and getting you a margin. So some of the stuff that we talked about, it's got some neat information in there. And again, you can turn some of this, into more graphically pleasing as you see below. On the next slide, we've got, again, KPIs from a payer perspective, showing you what's going on with your aging, what's going on with your days to bill, days to pay. Again, some of those metrics we talked about. So started with talking about the metrics that matter, and then it's how do you get there, and what's the easiest and most cost-effective way to do it. And then finally, another example of one that shows you, what, again, different metrics can go in here, but collections, case volume, charges, showing where are you, what are you trending to, what's your goal, again, graphically pleasing to show you whether you are on track or not, what's going on with your appointments, how many did you schedule, how many were performed, how many were canceled. So we've got a lot of really good information to help you think through this. And like I said, and of course, there's always the option of which is going to be a bigger, more intensive, and probably expensive structure depending on who you are and what your size is and what your budget capability and expectations are. But the ability to build your own data warehouse and such it's like I said, it's another undertaking. But another way to cut, you can cut very specifically to your needs that way. And finally, we leave with my friend Yogi Berra, that if you don't know where you're going, you might wind up someplace else. And so with that, I think that concludes the actual formal presentation, and I think we've got Q&A from here.
Yes. Nader and TJ, I want to thank you. That's one of the best webinars I've heard in a long time, and I hear about 50 or 60 a year. So just fantastic. One of the things I like so much about it is Nader with Lisa Rock runs one of the best billing and collecting revenue cycle companies in the surgery center area. And one of the reasons why we had nobody drop off during the entire webinar, though they're dropping off now that I'm talking, is because this was not a sales pitch at all. It was really just an informative, terrific discussion. So let me get to some of the questions we've had asked so that we could keep people on. Let me start with, in TJ or Nader, you guys will decide who will answer which question. How would you prioritize security solutions? How do you prioritize those?
This is TJ, thank you. That's a really good question, and it's a very difficult answer. It depends on your organization. It depends on their needs. I would say that you want to go after, not to abuse a phrase, but low-hanging fruit. So I think the 85% thwarting of attacks just through patching is big. I think distigs are big, hardening your operating systems. From there, it really does depend on what you think your biggest threat is.
Gotcha. And in terms of the patching, just to follow up on that one question, TJ, is how do people become aware of what patches they need? Is that just stuff that's sent to you by vendors, or how do you get that?
So that's also a good question. It depends on the software. If it's a Windows product, Windows operating system or Windows Office, you'll be notified by Windows. And most applications out there are pretty good about sending you notifications right on your computer. A lot of other vendors will send you an email to let you know that they have the latest security updates available. So without a larger technology scanning your systems for vulnerabilities, that's how you would know.
Gotcha. Next question. What's the best infrastructure solution for surgery centers or practices or for our audience? What's typically the best infrastructure solution?
And that's another one that depends on what your goals are and what your organization's needs are. I would say that it's very worthwhile to look into data center hosting, elements of the cloud, if you are a startup or you're a smaller organization. Definitely working with experts as often as you can. And obviously the larger ones have enough expertise on staff, I think, to make a smart enough decision for their organization.
Scott, and I would answer just from kind of where I sit. I look at these more from business, from a business perspective than an IT, obviously factoring in IT in that equation. But I think, anyone with X number of centers exploring these options that TJ has been talking about in the cloud is extremely valuable because of the balance of the value you're getting at the cost you're getting it. They're spreading their costs over a very, very wide base.
And I think TJ mentioned this before. Who are those cloud-based infrastructure companies that you're talking about?
Two offhand, two of the biggest ones really are Microsoft, and their product is called Azure, A-Z-U-R-E.
Gotcha.
And Amazon,
okay.
And Amazon AWS, Amazon Web Services. Those are the two big ones.
Got it. Can I ask a question? Is TJ now working full-time with NMBS?
Yes.
And will
he did. He's been here about 2 years.
Gotcha. Well, and he's just helping you back up everything you do and make sure your technology solutions are correct for interacting with customers, I take it, to make sure that then what you're doing on the billing and collecting and revenue cycle side works well with customers.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. So yeah, he's our VP of technology overseeing everything we do technologically. But yeah, so we would work, for example, in the client systems in most cases. So that's what I had mentioned earlier. Whatever the issues are that surgery centers are facing are essentially the same issues that we face and the same analysis.
Okay, gotcha. And you're not doing, he's serving as sort of your chief technology officer, senior vice president, CIO, but you're not separately doing consulting. Your business is billing and collecting for surgery centers, practices, et cetera.
That's right.
Okay. Virtualization. Can you explain what virtualization means? Maybe this is tied to sort of the cloud-based infrastructure, but TJ, it seems like you're the right person to answer this.
Yes, and it absolutely is part of the cloud-based infrastructure, but on-premise can do virtualization as well. So when talking about virtualization, it's important for folks to get specific. So there's server virtualization, which you install a product called a hypervisor on top of bare metal server, and the hypervisor will then cut up that physical server into a bunch of virtual servers. So it gives you a little more bang for your buck. Better redundancy and recovery and things like that. You have virtual desktop infrastructure, so that's the virtualization of a user's desktop, and that's basically using an entire data center's worth of servers and storage technology to support a user experience only. So it's kind of similar to terminal services, but there's a lot more going on behind it. And then another virtualization would be user profile virtualization, which is a way for a user to be able to log into any new system in a relatively short amount of time because you've used a third-party technology to virtualize that user's environment. So I would say those are the three types of virtualizations I'm most aware of.
Got it. Let me go to a billing and fee question and then come back to these issues. Now, this might be for you or for Lisa or maybe TJ, but this is someone who says, we use Medicare fee schedules. How do you also relate that to your contracting rates? I mean, how do your contracting rates, how do you deal with that versus Medicare fee schedules or I take clients' contracting rates?
Hey, Scott, I've been sitting on the sidelines listening to the conversation, and most of the IT stuff is over my head, but this is certainly in my wheelhouse. So if you could repeat the question one more time so I make sure I understand.
Absolutely. I think the question is, how do you relate customer contracting rates? I think they're payer rates, their contracting rates to Medicare rates. I assume Medicare rates are what Medicare rates are, but for commercial payers, how do those compare to Medicare rates? And maybe just give us a quick lay of the land.
Yeah, let me give you a quick one on that. So I think a good rule of thumb is to understand on the commercial side if you're dealing with a self-funded group or you're dealing with a fully insured group. So once we identify those two categories, if I'm a self-funded group, then I'm going to look at the employer summary plan description and look at the allowed amount on out-of-network or even in-network procedures. And then in an out-of-network environment, that's what the carrier will allow. In an in-network, they may allow what the carrier has determined or the payer has determined. So if we're fully insured, then the carrier would probably use some version of usual and customary to include fair health. But it's something that requires a lot of investigation when you're determining what the proper way to attack the usual and customary infrastructure and contracting. Yeah, you just really have to know the animal.
Got it. And I'll encourage the listener to follow up with the question. I'm going to come back to it in a second. There's a number of other questions here. There's a question that deals with recommendations to secure mobile devices and best practices for that. Is that something TJ would take the lead on?
Yes. Yes. So recommendations and best practices. So I would start, as always in this industry, with HIPAAs. HIPAA offers a little bit of guidance regarding mobile devices. I can't cite it offhand, but it's a good starting point. Then I would move to, once again, Distict, because they offer all sorts of options and requirements
to secure mobile devices. And then finally, I would use mobile device management solution to help carry out those security configurations recommended by TISA.
Gotcha. Do you want to, TJ, do you want to talk just one bit more about, you had mentioned or talked a lot about prioritizing security, and sort of a tail-on question was, if 85% of the benefit is in patches, what do you sort of do for the rest of security needs, and how do you make cost-benefit assessments? And I apologize for sort of freewheeling a little bit, but I was trying to understand, if only 15% of stuff's outside patches and you have to make cost-benefit decisions as to how you prioritize, how do you make those assessments?
Scott, I'll jump in and answer that, because we always have the discussions, and TJ does an awesome job of laying that out, and then we kind of look through honestly, to me, I look at it, it's a risk evaluation. And when we sat down and had the discussion and looking at what was going on in the dark web, and that people would steal this data, try to essentially hold you hostage, ransom it to you for $500,000, $1 million. If you don't pay it, it's going on the dark web. My first question was, how do we stop that from happening, and what does that cost? So it really becomes, I think, an analysis of the cost versus the risk. And the risk of some of these things are so high that the last thing I want to do is be in the news for having a breach of one of my large clients data, and it was our fault on something, and if we would have spent X dollars more, it wouldn't have had happened. So I look at it a lot of, what does it cost me to protect my clients and keep us out of the newspaper for the wrong things?
Gotcha. Sort of how serious risk is it? How bad a risk would it be? What does it cost to fix it? I mean, you were doing some math earlier. If something cost $8 a record to fix, but it has potential exposure of $100,000, you would make that choice. If something cost $80 to fix, but has $100 exposure, you might not make that choice.
I think that's exactly right, Scott.
And you have the challenge in the technology world and the insurance world of trying to hit this right balance of being insured but not throwing away money too.
Yeah, and honestly, it's funny you use that word. That's what I talk to TJ. I tell him it's like the mafia. You're paying for mafia insurance at this point.
It really is. I think we've wrapped up on sort of the questions that we're going to take in front of everybody. Nader and TJ, I know you see the questions online that have not been answered, and if any of those make a lot of sense or things that you guys can answer readily, Emma will get you the people's names who asked them, and you'll be able to email them and see if you want to have a discussion with them or how helpful that is. I know some of them are one bit just more sort of tangential. The slides, somebody did ask, will the slides be made available? The slides will be sent to everybody that registered in the next, there are a couple hundred people that registered that will be sent to them in the next week or so following the webinar plus the recording. I want to wrap up. It's literally one of the best webinars I've listened in on in a long time. Just a great job by TJ, Nader, and Lisa, who just jumped in for a cameo appearance at the end there. But just a terrific company, one of the leaders in billing and collecting services, and have been around for a long time now, and just really a real positive company to work with. So Nader, Lisa, TJ, it's great to hear from you today. And just terrific to hear from all you folks. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Emma.